Robb Stark sat alone in the great tent, his sword across his knees, his mind heavier than the iron blade. Outside, the northern lords waited, voices full of anger and pride. They had crowned him king in the north just days ago, their voices roaring under the cold, grey sky. But Robb was thinking of his father's head on a spike. He could still hear the sound, the crowd screaming, Sansa crying, Joffrey laughing. He could still feel the hopeless rage tearing his chest apart when they sent the Raven with the news. Ned Stark, Lord of Winterfell, Warden of the North, dead like a common criminal. And now the South expected a war. But Robb was no fool. He saw the numbers, he saw the odds. The North was proud but poor. The Lannisters were rich, full of cunning and cruelty, and their armies were endless. And behind them, the throne, the power. If Robb led the North to war now, he would lose more than battles. He would lose Winterfell, he would lose his family, he would lose the North itself. He would lose everything his father died trying to protect. Catelyn Stark entered the tent. Quietly, her face pale but her voice strong. "Your bannermen are restless," she said. "They want blood, Robb, they want revenge." Robb lifted his head slowly, looking into his mother's tired eyes. "I know," he said, "but blood won't bring father back. Blood won't keep Bran and Rickon safe. Blood won't free Sansa." Catelyn moved closer, kneeling before him. "What are you thinking?" she asked, though fear already flickered in her voice. Robb swallowed hard. "I will bend the knee," he said, the words like stones in his mouth. "For the good of the North, for the safety of our people, I will swear loyalty to King Joffrey Baratheon." The words hung in the air like smoke. Catelyn closed her eyes briefly, pain flickering across her face. "Your bannermen will not understand," she whispered. "They don't have to," Robb said, standing slowly. "I have to carry the burden. Father always said, the man who passes the sentence should swing the sword. I will pass this sentence. I will save the North, even if it costs me everything." By morning, Robb stood before the lords of the North, the Greatjon, the Karstarks, the Manderleys, the Glovers, and many more. They stared at him, fierce and loyal, expecting a king to lead them into glorious battle. Robb spoke carefully, his voice steady. "I called you here to thank you for your loyalty. I called you here to tell you that the North is strong. Because we are wise. My father taught me that pride can kill a man faster than a sword. We will not follow pride into ruin." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Greatjon Umber shifted, frowning deeply. "We declared you our king," he said, voice rough as gravel. "You would throw down your crown?" Robb nodded once. "I will swear fealty to the Iron Throne. I will offer the North's loyalty in exchange for peace and the safe return of my sisters." Silence fell like a hammer. Some men gaped, some looked away, ashamed. Some glared at Robb like he had spit in their faces. Rickard Karstark stepped forward, his eyes burning. "My sons died fighting for you," he hissed. "Will their blood be repaid with surrender?" Robb bowed his head. "I will carry their memory," he said. "I will carry all of you, but I will not lead the North to slaughter." Outside the tent, the banners of the direwolf snapped and twisted in the cold wind. Already, it seemed, they were beginning to fall. When the Raven left for King's Landing, carrying Robb's letter of surrender, the camp felt heavier, darker. Men who had once sung songs of victory now whispered behind Robb's back. The Greatjon left without a word. Small groups of soldiers began slipping away at night. The North was splintering. Robb stood watching them go, his heart torn in two. "I have saved the North," he told himself again and again. But deep inside, he wondered if he had killed it instead. The Raven reached King's Landing on a hot, sticky afternoon, when the city stank of sweat and sewage. Maester Pycelle carried Robb Stark's letter into the throne room with shaking hands. Even the old man seemed surprised by what he held, words of surrender from the so-called king in the North. Joffrey lounged on the Iron Throne, his legs thrown carelessly over one armrest. His golden crown tilted slightly on his head. Beside him, Queen Cersei sat sharp and cold as a blade. Behind them, Lord Tywin had finally come to court, towering in armor that gleamed like a second sun. When Pycelle finished reading, a strange silence filled the hall. Even the courtiers, rats and whisperers all, didn't know how to react. Joffrey's mouth twisted into a cruel smile. "He begs for mercy," he said, laughing. The young wolf tucked his tail between his legs. Cersei's eyes flickered with calculation. "He offers loyalty," she said carefully. "The North could be useful if properly chained." Lord Tywin only frowned, his fingers drumming softly on the hilt of his sword. "A beaten enemy is still an enemy," he said. "But if Robb Stark bends the knee publicly before the whole court, we make an example. We strip the North of its pride without lifting a sword." Joffrey licked his lips like a cat savoring a mouse. "Make him come here," he said. "Make him kneel before me, in front of the whole city. I want the people to see the wolf crawl." Pycelle bowed, and the raven was sent back north with the crown's terms. Robb Stark must come to King's Landing. He must kneel before King Joffrey Baratheon in front of the court. He must swear fealty. Only then would his sister's safety and the North's future be considered. Back at River Run, Robb read the letter under a grey sky that promised rain. His hands trembled slightly at the edges, though he pressed them flat to the parchment, as if he could hold his fear down by force. "Trap," said Grey Wind, growling low and uneasy at his side. Robb looked to his mother, to his bannermen, fewer now than before. Catelyn's face was pale. "They will humiliate you," she said. "They will make you a spectacle." "I know," Robb said, "but if I don't go, they'll say the North breaks its oaths. They'll say we have no honor. Then they'll come north anyway, but with the world at their backs." The Great John was gone now, having ridden back to Last Hearth in disgust. Karstark's men barely spoke to Robb anymore. Loyalty was slipping away, like water through cracked hands. "You will not return," Lord Roose Bolton said softly, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "They will never let you leave King's Landing. Alive!" Robb's lips pressed into a thin line. He had already accepted it. "If I must die," he said, "then let it be in keeping my people safe." Catelyn gripped his hands, desperate. "There must be another way." Robb kissed her forehead gently, as he had when he was a boy. "There is no other way," he said. The journey south was grim. Robb rode with only a small retinue. Sir Roderick Castle, a few Stark guardsmen, and Maester Luwin. No banners flew above. Their heads, the direwolf banners, had been taken down, folded and hidden like shameful things. As they neared King's Landing, the city walls rose up like the teeth of some giant beast. And Robb realized he had never truly seen how ugly it was. Before, the filth, the desperation, the crows circling overhead. The gates opened slowly with a deep, groaning sound. Like the city itself was laughing at him. Inside, the small folk jeered and spat as he passed, throwing rotten fruit and mud. "Traitor!" someone screamed. "Wolf! Coward!" another shouted. Robb kept his head high, his face like stone. Grey Wind stalked. Beside his horse, teeth bared, hackles raised, but silent under Robb's command. At the Red Keep, the throne room waited, packed full of lords, ladies and leeches of every stripe. A sea of hostile faces. Robb could see Sansa near the dais, her face pale and fearful, her hands twisting in her skirts. Joffrey sat atop the Iron Throne, beaming like a child on name day. When Robb stepped into the hall, every voice fell silent. The air thick with hatred. "Come forward," Joffrey called, his voice high and mocking. "Kneel, Stark." Robb walked slowly, every step a hammer to his pride. He could feel 1,000 eyes watching, judging, mocking. He knelt before the boy king, his sword left at the door, his honor bleeding out on the cold stone floor. "I, Robb Stark, of Winterfell," he said, voice strong despite the weight crushing him, "swear fealty to King Joffrey Baratheon, rightful ruler of the 7 kingdoms." A moment of silence. Then Joffrey stood, drawing his sword, lion's tooth, and touched it lightly, to Robb's bowed head. "I accept your surrender," he said, grinning cruelly, "but the North must learn its place." Behind him Cersei smiled thinly. Lord Tywin watched with cold, golden eyes, and somewhere, deep inside himself, Robb Stark realized he was already dead. The days that followed were a slow, painful death for Robb Stark. He was given a room in the Red Keep, not a prison cell, but it might as well have been. Guards stood outside his door day and night. His every move was watched, his every word weighed. He was paraded through the city like a broken hound, dressed not in the proud grey and white of House Stark, but in plain brown cloth. No sword, no honour, just a hostage with a famous name. At court, Joffrey loved to toy with him. He would summon Robb during feasts, make him pour wine for the lords and ladies, make him bow and scrape like a servant. The small folk laughed, the nobles whispered. Each humiliation was sharper than any blade. Once, during a feast, Joffrey threw a chicken leg at him. "Fetch, wolf!" he cried, laughing. And Robb, jaw tight, burning inside, had to bend and pick it up. Sansa watched from the sidelines, her face frozen. She dared not speak to him. They were prisoners both, trapped in golden cages. But worse than the shame was the news trickling in from the north. Letters came smuggled by sympathetic hands. Not that Robb had many left. The Karstarks had withdrawn their loyalty. The Umbers refused to send their taxes south. Even the Manderleys in White Harbor were whispering about a true king and wolves who remember. The North was rising, but not for him. They saw Robb now as a traitor to his own blood, a Stark who bowed before lions. They spoke of other names, of Bran and Rickon, even of Jon Snow at the Wall. Any Stark would do, so long as it wasn't Robb the Kneeler. One night, Maester Luwin was allowed to visit under heavy guard. He brought with him a letter in trembling hands, sealed with black wax. Robb broke the seal. As he read, his face drained of colour. "They've declared me dead," he said softly. "The lords of the North. They've chosen Bran as Lord of Winterfell." Luwin bowed his head, sorrow etched deep into the lines of his face. "I'm sorry, my lord. They believe it is the only way to unite the North." Robb folded the letter slowly, his hands trembling only slightly. "Then it's done," he said. "I am no king. I am no lord. I am nothing." The guards laughed outside the door, hearing only the low, broken voice within. Meanwhile, in the Red Keep, new plots were spinning. Cersei and Tywin held long councils behind closed doors. The North was slipping through their fingers. Sending ravens and promises hadn't worked. Gold hadn't worked. Fear hadn't worked. Only blood would work. And Robb Stark, broken and humiliated, was no longer useful as a symbol of submission. He had become a reminder that wolves could be chained, yes, but never tamed. At one council meeting, Tywin spoke clearly, without hesitation. "Kill him!" Cersei agreed with a single cold nod. Joffrey clapped his hands with glee. "Off with his head," the boy king crowed. "We'll send it to Winterfell. Let them see what happens to traitors and cowards." Plans were set. The execution was scheduled to happen quietly, under the cover of darkness. No public show this time. Robb's death would be a message whispered in the dark, meant to sow fear without inspiring rebellion. But not all in the Red Keep had forgotten loyalty. That night a shadow moved through the halls, a figure in grey, unnoticed by the guards. At the door to Robb's chambers, two men fell silently, their throats opened by a quick, unseen blade. Robb, sitting by the cold hearth, looked up in shock as the door swung open. There stood Arya Stark, older, wilder, with dirt on her face and a dagger in each hand, but it was her, fierce and furious as a summer storm. "Come on, stupid," she hissed. "They're coming to kill you." For a heartbeat, Robb just stared at her, thinking maybe he had gone mad. Maybe this was a dying dream. But when Arya grabbed his hand and pulled him to his feet, he moved without thinking. The wolf still lived inside him after all. Beaten, battered but not dead. Not yet. Robb followed Arya through the darkened halls of the Red Keep, his heart pounding so hard he could barely hear anything else. Grey Wind padded beside him, silent but tense, every muscle coiled like a drawn bowstring. Arya moved fast, darting from shadow to shadow like she had been born for it. Robb barely recognized her. His little sister, who used to chase cats through Winterfell's halls, now moved like a ghost, deadly and sure. "How did you even get here?" he whispered as they ducked behind a tapestry. Arya flashed him a grim, tight smile. "Friends," she said. "Friends who don't like lions." They crept past drunken guards slumped against the walls, past courtiers too busy gossiping to notice anything wrong. The Red Keep was always buzzing, even at night, but there was a certain tension in the air now, like the city itself knew something ugly was about to happen. They were close to the gates when they heard the bells start to ring. Not the clear, clean bells for feasts or weddings. These were alarm bells, deep, harsh, angry. "They know," Arya cursed under her breath. She grabbed Robb's arm. "Faster!" Guards poured into the corridors like a tide of steel. Some shouted Robb's name, some shouted "traitor." Grey Wind growled low in his throat, ready to tear them apart, but Robb shook his head. "No," he whispered. "No killing unless we have to. Killing a Lannister guard now would be like lighting wildfire in a dry field. It would burn faster than they could run." They ran instead, down narrow servants' passages and crumbling stairwells Arya seemed to know by heart. Robb's legs burned, his lungs screamed, but he kept going. Every time he faltered, he felt the ghost of his father's hand on his back, pushing him forward. In the lowest level of the keep, they reached the black cells, the place where traitors and madmen rotted away in forgotten darkness. There, a man waited for them, leaning casually against the door, tall, thin, wearing a half-smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Didn't think you'd make it this far," said Jaqen H'ghar. Arya tossed him a small coin, a bit of dull, iron marked with strange shapes. "A girl kept her promise," she said. Jaqen bowed slightly, as if they were exchanging polite greetings at a feast instead of planning an escape. "This way?" He led them through a secret tunnel behind the dungeons, a dark, dripping hole that smelled of old blood and wet stone. Robb stumbled more than once, but Arya caught him each time. They emerged outside the city walls, near the river, where old fishing boats bobbed in the black water. A single skiff waited, a ragged man at the oars. "Quick," Arya said, "before—" They closed the river. As they pushed off into the water, Robb turned and looked back at King's Landing. The Red Keep loomed against the sky, cruel and jagged, its windows glowing like angry eyes. He didn't feel relief. He didn't even feel hope. He felt shame and rage and the heavy weight of what he had lost. The North had abandoned him. The South had humiliated him, and yet he lived. Grey Wind whined softly beside him, sensing the battle brewing inside his master's heart. Robb looked at Arya, his little sister, so fierce, so unbroken, and he made a silent promise to himself. He would not crawl anymore. He would not bow. If he was to be a wolf again, he would be a wolf the South would never forget, even if it cost him everything, everything. The boat rocked gently as they drifted down the Blackwater rush, the ruined skyline of King's Landing shrinking behind them. The oarsman said nothing, his face hidden under a hood. Robb sat stiffly in the boat, his hands clenched into fists. In his lap, Grey Wind's warm body pressed protectively against his knee. Arya sat across from him, sharpening a dagger with slow, careful strokes. Sparks danced from the blade with each scrape of the whetstone. She didn't look up, she didn't have to. She felt the anger boiling off Robb like heat from a forge. After a long while she broke the silence. "You're angry," she said flatly. Robb stared at her, hollow and hard. "I'm ashamed," he said. "I bent the knee, I crawled before that boy." He spat the word like poison. And for what? The North cast me aside. The Lannisters tried to kill me anyway. I lost everything. Arya didn't flinch. She just kept sharpening her dagger. You didn't lose me, she said. Not yet. Robb's throat tightened. He looked away toward the dark riverbank slipping past them. I don't even know where to go, he said. If I return to Winterfell, will they even open the gates? Will they call me brother or traitor? Arya finally set the dagger down and leaned forward, her voice low and fierce. Winterfell is still ours. Bran is there. Rickon too, maybe. The North doesn't belong to the Karstarks or the Umbers. It belongs to the Starks. And you're still a Stark. Robb shook his head slowly. I'm not sure what I am anymore, the oarsman grunted then, pointing with a crooked finger. Dock ahead. Get off here if you want to live. Gates'll close by dawn. They clambered onto muddy ground, the smell of wet grass and river rot heavy in the air. Grey wind leapt ashore with a low growl, already scenting the wind. The oarsman shoved, off without another word, vanishing into the darkness like a ghost. Robb and Arya stood there for a moment, just two small figures under a sky full of uncaring stars. The world felt too big, too wild. Every path ahead seemed dark and dangerous. North, Robb said finally. We go north. Arya nodded once. North or nowhere. They travelled by night, moving quickly, hiding by day. They stayed off the King's Road, cutting through woods and fields. The journey was slow and brutal. Robb had spent his whole life in castles, riding at the head of armies. He was not used to scrounging for food, drinking from muddy streams, sleeping in the dirt. But Arya moved like she belonged to the wild now, teaching him how to survive with quiet patience. In the second week, Robb finally asked the question burning in his gut. How did you get so good at this? Arya's face shuttered, going blank. I learned, she said simply, from people who wanted me dead, from people who didn't care if I lived or died. Robb didn't push. He didn't need to. He saw it in the way she moved, in the way she looked at the world, like a cornered animal that had learned never to trust again. As they neared the neck, where the swamps and mists began to swallow the land, Robb started hearing more rumors from passing travelers. Talk of rebellion. Talk of war, talk of the North raising new banners, not the direwolf of Stark, not yet. Instead, there were whispers of a boy lord at Winterfell, young, broken, but with the blood of the first men in his veins. Bran Stark, and at his side, men, and women who whispered another name in darker corners. Jon Snow, the bastard of Winterfell, the one who would not kneel. Arya saw Robb flinch when he heard it. She touched his arm very lightly. You're still Robb Stark, she said, and they'll remember. You just have to remind them. Robb wanted to believe it. He wanted it so badly. It hurt, but deep down, he feared the truth. Maybe the North didn't need him anymore. Maybe the wolf who knelt had no pack left to return to. The neck was a place where the land itself seemed to rebel against travelers. The ground turned to muck, sucking at their boots. Fog slithered through the trees like pale snakes. Strange cries echoed through the swamps at night, some animal, some not. Robb and Arya moved carefully now, each step a battle. Even Grey Wind stayed close, his ears pinned flat, his powerful muscles twitching with tension. This is reed country, Arya said, wiping mud from her face. Father used to say no one gets through the neck without their leave. Robb nodded grimly. He remembered the tales. The Crannog men, small folk, swamp, dwellers, loyal only to themselves and to the Starks. Maybe if anyone still remembered the old ways, it was them, but luck had long since stopped favoring Robb Stark. They were 3 days deep into the marsh when they spotted the riders, at least a dozen men, armored but mud-streaked, their banners drooping in the wet air. At first glance, Robb's heart leapt. He saw a direwolf sigil, stitched into a muddy standard. Maybe, just maybe, loyal men had come to find him, but Arya grabbed his arm hard. "Look closer," she hissed. Robb narrowed his eyes. The direwolf was there, yes, but stitched over it, almost like a mockery, was the flayed man of House Bolton. His stomach dropped. Rose Bolton's men, the traitors who once smiled in his halls, the ones who had always been waiting for a moment like this. Before Robb could react, the riders spotted them. "Well, well," one called out, grinning. His face was twisted by old scars, the young wolf himself, crawling back through the swamps like a beaten dog. Arya slid a dagger into her hand without hesitation, her eyes like chips of ice. Robb stepped in front of her, raising his hands slowly. "I am Robb Stark of Winterfell," he said, voice clear despite the weight crushing his chest. "And I demand safe passage north." The leader barked a laugh. "Safe passage? Boy, you've got no more claim to Winterfell than I do. You bent the knee to the lions. The North remembers I, but they don't remember you kindly." Grey Wind snarled, teeth bared, but Robb put a hand on his fur to calm him. "You can kill me," Robb said, "but you'll answer for it. The North won't forget." The scarred man smirked. "Maybe, or maybe they'll just be glad you're gone." The riders moved in, surrounding them, swords half-drawn. Robb saw how it would happen, a quick fight, blood in the mud, another nameless death in a land already drowning in corpses. But Arya wasn't thinking about dying. She moved like a shadow, darting forward and slashing the nearest rider across the thigh. The man screamed and toppled from his horse. Grey Wind lunged, his jaws closing around another man's throat with a sickening crunch. Chaos exploded. Robb ripped a sword from the fallen man and fought like a wolf cornered, fast and vicious. Steel clanged, mud splattered, horses screamed. Arya ducked and spun, small and deadly, stabbing low where the men's armor was weakest. Robb didn't know how long they fought. Time stretched into a blur of sweat, blood, and desperate fury. When it ended, the swamp was quiet again. 6 Bolton men lay dead. The others fled, limping and cursing into the mist. Robb stood in the churned mud, breathing hard, blood dripping from a gash on his forehead. Arya leaned on her knees, gasping, her dagger slick with red. Grey Wind prowled among the corpses, his muzzle stained dark. Robb wiped his blade clean and met Arya's eyes. "We can't turn back," she said hoarsely. "If Bolton's men are here, Frey's men won't be far behind." Robb nodded grim. "No more hiding, no more running." He looked north, where the land stretched out in endless grey. Somewhere beyond those mists was Winterfell, his home, his birthright. "I'm done crawling," Robb said, his voice low and deadly. "If they've crowned Bran, if they follow Jon, fine, but I will stand before them as a Stark, not as a prisoner, not as a broken thing." Arya smiled fiercely, blood smeared across her cheek. "That's more like it, big brother." Together, they moved on through the swamp, the last true wolves in a world that had forgotten what it meant to bare its teeth. The mists thinned as they left the neck behind, and before them lay the rolling cold hills of the true north. It should have felt like coming home, but Robb felt only the weight of dread tightening around his chest. Winterfell was close now. He could almost smell the old stone, hear the howling wind through the broken towers, but Winterfell wasn't the place he had left. He knew that much. The banners flying from its ramparts might still bear the direwolf of Stark. But what waited inside was anyone's guess. Robb and Arya moved carefully through the woods. They saw travellers now moving in small, wary groups. Peasants, a few hedge knights, tradesmen hauling carts. They all spoke of the same things in low, fearful voices. Bran the Broken sits Winterfell's seat. Lord Snow marches on the wall. No more, he calls the Bannermen to him. The North belongs to the Starks again, but not to the wolf who knelt. Arya glanced sideways at Robb, after hearing it said a dozen times. "You don't have to do this," she said, her voice low. "You could disappear, start over somewhere else." Robb shook his head. "I was raised to be Lord of Winterfell. I was crowned king in the north. I bent the knee once to save my family and lost everything. I won't run like a thief in the night." Arya didn't argue. She just touched the hilt of her sword and said, "Then we finish what we started." They camped a few miles from Winterfell's walls, hiding in a grove of old pines. That night, Robb didn't sleep. He sat awake, staring at the dark mass of the castle looming in the distance. Grey Wind rested his great head on Robb's lap, whimpering softly as if sensing the battle ahead wouldn't be fought with steel, but with hearts hardened against him. Before dawn, they walked to the gates. Winterfell's walls, once warm with banners and smoke and laughter, were colder now. Harsh, guarded like a fortress. Soldiers patrolled the tops of the walls, men Robb didn't recognize. When he approached, the guards shouted down, "Name yourself." Robb stepped forward, pulling back his hood. His hair was longer now, tangled and rough, his face lined with the hardships of the road, but his voice was steady. "Robb Stark," he said, the words ringing through the morning chill. "Son of Eddard Stark, Warden of the North." There was a long silence. The guards conferred nervously. Finally, the heavy gates creaked open just enough to let them pass through. Robb and Arya walked in, mud-stained, worn but unbowed. Inside the courtyard, a small crowd had gathered, and servants, a few lords, some curious soldiers. Faces Robb barely knew. Some looked at him with awe, some with suspicion, some with open hatred. From the great hall came Bran Stark, carried in a wheeled chair by a pair of guards. He looked older, colder. His face was pale and calm, but his eyes were no longer those of a boy. "Robb," Bran said, his voice flat, neither welcoming nor hostile. Robb knelt on one knee before him, bowing his head low. "My lord," he said. Arya stood by his side, watching, tight as a drawn bow. "You should have stayed away," Bran said softly. Robb looked up sharply. "I am Stark of Winterfell," he said. "I have come to serve the North, to make things right." Bran studied him with those strange, empty eyes. "You bent the knee to the Lannisters," he said. "You served the boy who murdered our father." "I bent the knee to save our family," Robb said, the words tearing from his throat. "I tried to protect the North. I paid the price. I paid it 100 times over." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some looked moved, others looked unmoved, stone-faced. Bran tilted his head slightly, almost curious. "The North does not forget," Bran said, "but the North also knows the cost of war." Robb's heart hammered painfully against his ribs. "Give me a chance," he said. "Let me fight for the North again. Let me prove I'm still a wolf." Bran was silent for a long moment. Isiu, sun crested the walls, casting long, cold shadows across the yard. Finally, Bran nodded once. "You will not sit the high seat again," he said. "That belongs to me or to Jon Snow if he returns. But you may stay, you may fight, if you remember who you are." Robb bowed his head, feeling shame and gratitude not inside him. "I remember," he whispered. As he rose to his feet, Arya gave him a small, fierce nod, but Robb saw it in the faces around him. Not all had forgiven, not all had forgotten, and not all would welcome a fallen wolf back into the pack. Winter was still coming, and Robb Stark would have to earn his place all over again. Winterfell in winter was a different beast. The cold was deeper here, seeping into stone and bone alike. Fires burned in every hall, but the chill never left. Robb Stark walked those familiar corridors like a ghost, his boots echoing on the cold flagstones. Everywhere he went, eyes followed him, curious, suspicious, some filled with hate. He wasn't a lord anymore. He wasn't a king. He was a reminder of failure. At meals, he sat at the lower tables with the guards and minor knights. Bran, cold and still in his chair, ruled from the dais. Arya, restless and sharp, barely ate, her hand always close to her sword. Jon Snow had not returned yet. His absence hung over the hall like a shadow. Robb spent his days drilling with the young soldiers repairing armor, training the wolves that still roamed the woods. He fought and worked and bled for Winterfell, anything to prove that he was still Stark at heart. But whispers grew louder. One night Arya found him alone in the Godswood, kneeling before the old weirwood tree. "They're saying you plan to take Winterfell back," she said, voice tight. "They say you're gathering men." Robb turned to her, stunned. "I'm not," he said. "I swear it. I would never." Arya crouched beside him, her grey eyes sharp. "I know, but it doesn't matter. They're scared. People are easier to move with fear than with love." That night a fire broke out in the stables. 3 horses died. A boy lost his arm to the flames, and in the smoke and panic someone painted a crude message across the courtyard walls in black ash. "No kneelers in Winterfell." Bran summoned Robb to the great hall the next morning. The hall was packed, lords and soldiers, servants and maesters, all watching with cold, expectant faces. Bran's voice was soft, but it cut deeper than any sword. "There are some who believe you are a threat." Robb stood tall, though every part of him ached. "I came to serve," he said. "I came to bleed for the North if I must." Some scoffed, some muttered darkly. Lord Dustin, heavy-set and red-faced, stepped forward. "Bleed you will, kneeler," he spat. "You shame the North just by standing in it." The room buzzed with tension. It would take only a spark to light a war inside these very walls. Bran's eyes, ancient and empty, locked onto Robb's. "Swear it," he said. "Swear here before gods and men that you will never claim Winterfell, that you will never seek a crown again." Robb's throat was dry. He looked at Arya, who gave him the tiniest nod. He looked at Grey Wind, who stood bristling at his side, ready to defend him to the death. And he looked at the Stark banners hanging heavy above the hall, remembering his father's words. "The man who passes the sentence should swing the sword." Slowly Robb knelt. He bowed his head, not to a boy king or a southern tyrant, but to his family, to the North, to something greater than himself. "I swear," he said. His voice cracked slightly, but it carried through the hall like a hammer-striking stone. "I will never claim Winterfell. I will never seek a crown. I am Robb Stark, son of Eddard Stark, and I live only to serve the North." Silence. Bran closed his eyes, as if in prayer. Arya let out a slow breath. Even Lord Dustin seemed robbed of some of his fury. Bran spoke again. "Then rise, Robb Stark, and stand among your kin once more." Robb stood. Not as a lord, not as a king, as a brother, as a son of the North. It would not be easy. He knew there were still men in Winterfell who wanted him dead. He knew there would be cold nights and colder looks. He would have to fight for every scrap of trust, but he was home, truly home. Later, as snow drifted through the Godswood, Arya found him again. "You could have fought them," she said. "You could have tried to take it all back." Robb smiled, a small, sad smile. "I don't want to rule," he said. "I just want to be worthy of our name again." Arya smiled too, for the first time in a long while. "You already are," she said, and as Grey Wind howled under the moon, the sound carrying across the cold, wild north, Robb Stark, the wolf who had knelt and fallen, began to rise again. Not as a king, but as something rarer. As a Stark who had lost everything and still remembered who he was. The North remembered, and this time it would not forget.